grown man wanders through the aisles of a grocery store, lost in thought, when a familiar melody drifts through the speakers, a song he hasn't heard in decades. His body freezes, his breath catches, and suddenly he's not 42 anymore. He's 7, sitting cross-legged on the carpet of his childhood bedroom, the way the sunlight slanted through the curtains, the faint smell of dust and crayons, the tightness in his chest that he didn't have words for back then. It's all there, alive again, summoned in an instant. But how? If we can't recall most of our early years, why can a scent, a sound, or a passing phrase bring them rushing back, fully formed and emotionally vivid? Where do those feelings live? The ones we never meant to keep, the ones we thought were lost. Here's the paradox. On the surface, we forget childhood. We lose names, places, the specifics of what happened and when. Childhood becomes a faded photograph, blurred at the edges, but something deeper endures. The body remembers, the brain reacts. Beneath language and logic, the emotions we once felt, awe, fear, comfort, loneliness, remain etched in the nervous system, and science is beginning to understand how. Neuroscience now suggests that early memories aren't truly erased. They're layered, stored not just in the hippocampus, where narrative memory lives, but in the amygdala, the cerebellum, and the very circuits that control our breath and heartbeat. Experiences from our first years shape the structure of our brains and the wiring of our emotional reflexes. They shape how we respond to love, to conflict, to safety, to abandonment. They shape how we see the world and how we see ourselves. So maybe the child you were hasn't vanished into the past. Maybe they're still here, hidden behind your adult eyes, quiet in the background, not gone, just waiting, watching, whispering back in moments you least expect, like a song in a grocery store. Long before neuroscience gave names to memory systems, ancient traditions spoke of a self beneath the self, a permanent inner layer untouched by time. In the Upanishads, early Indian philosophers described this as the asterisk, Antaratman asterisk, the inner child or soul layer, an essence that carries through every stage of life, unchanged. Plato echoed a similar intuition. To him, all learning was a form of remembering, a return to knowledge the soul already possessed before birth. Childhood, in this sense, wasn't just a beginning, it was a kind of eternal wisdom, briefly accessible before adulthood dulled its clarity. Centuries later, Sigmund Freud reframed adult suffering as a return to childhood wounds, traumas buried so deeply that we relive them without understanding their source. The past, he argued, is never truly past. It lives in the body. It echoes in the mind. For much of the 20th century, developmental psychology followed a different path. Jean Piaget, one of the most influential thinkers on childhood cognition, mapped how children move from sensory experience to symbolic thought to abstract reasoning. But he, like many others of his time, assumed that early memories simply vanish, that the first few years of life, years full of vulnerability, attachment, and rapid brain growth, disappear behind a neurological curtain called infantile amnesia. And yet, something didn't quite add up. By the 1980s, scientists began asking new questions. If children forget everything from their earliest years, why do certain emotional patterns persist? Why does the body respond so intensely to specific triggers? A harsh tone, a familiar smell, a facial expression, even when we have no conscious memory of what it means. This led to the exploration of implicit memory, a form of memory that doesn't rely on conscious recall. Unlike explicit memory, which lets us tell stories about our past, implicit memory shapes our behavior, our reflexes, our sense of safety or danger, without ever speaking in words. It hides in posture, in breath, in the space between thoughts. It's the memory of the nervous system itself. Today, this insight has reshaped entire fields. Therapists no longer see childhood as something that ends when adulthood begins. Instead, they see it as active architecture, a living foundation built before language, one that continues to shape how we love, how we grieve, how we trust or recoil, or feel seen. Conditions like anxiety, depression, chronic loneliness, or complex trauma often trace back to pre-verbal experiences. And neuroscience now confirms what mystics and philosophers have long intuited. Emotional memory forms before narrative memory. The brain begins storing feelings before it knows how to describe them, which raises a haunting, essential question. What else are we carrying that we can't explain with words? In an era of rising mental health awareness, this matters more than ever. If we hope to understand who we are, our fears, our desires, our patterns in relationships, we can't afford to ignore the parts of us formed in silence. Early memories shape not just our personal lives, but our cultures, our families, our generational stories. They influence how we make decisions, how we view ourselves, and whether we believe we are worthy of love or doomed to repeat harm. And if we cannot consciously recall those memories, how do we heal them? Can we truly rewrite a story we don't remember living? These questions are not abstract. They are urgent. They sit at the heart of every attempt to break a cycle, to love more deeply, to feel more whole. Because beneath every adult is a child, not gone, but layered beneath experience, still listening, still shaping, still waiting to be seen. In the early 2000s, a quiet revolution began in the field of neuroscience. For decades, it was assumed that young children, especially infants, lacked the neurological maturity to form lasting memories. But new studies challenged that belief. Using advanced brain imaging and longitudinal tracking, researchers discovered that infants not only absorb information about the world around them, they encode it deeply. Even in the womb, fetuses respond to sound, touch, and emotional cues from their mothers. After birth, the brain rapidly processes sensory and emotional input, laying down patterns of response long before the child can form a single sentence. What these studies revealed was astonishing. The building blocks of memory, particularly episodic and emotional memory, begin forming far earlier than anyone expected. Long before we learn to say, "I remember," the brain has already begun shaping who we are based on what we've felt. This discovery brought with it a profound dilemma. If infants and toddlers absorb experiences without the filter of conscious thought or language, are they more resilient or more vulnerable? On the one hand, they lack the cognitive frameworks to interpret pain, stress, or fear. On the other, they're entirely open to the world, their nervous systems raw, unguarded, and easily shaped. What happens when those earliest experiences are filled with instability, separation, or unspoken fear? If the body records trauma before the brain can narrate it, how does it show up later in life? Could we be making adult decisions about love, safety, work, even parenthood, based on emotions formed in a time we cannot remember? The science suggests yes. Animal studies provided some of the first clear evidence. In one landmark experiment, rat pups raised in high-stress environments developed permanently altered hippocampi, the brain structure responsible for memory and spatial navigation. These rats were more anxious, more reactive, and less able to regulate emotion as adults. Human studies followed with even more sobering findings. The ACE study, Adverse Childhood Experiences, became a turning point. Conducted on over 17,000 people, it showed a direct link between early stress, abuse, neglect, household dysfunction, and lifelong health outcomes. Increased risk of heart disease, addiction, depression, even cancer. What made the study more startling was that many of the participants had no conscious memory of the events, and yet their bodies had recorded every moment. This isn't just about memory, it's about identity, the silent architecture that shapes how we see the world. A child who experiences consistent nurturing grows into an adult with a baseline of trust. A child who experiences unpredictable caregiving may grow into an adult who fears abandonment, even if they can't recall why. Take the story of Maya, a woman in her 30s. On paper, her childhood seemed uneventful. No recorded trauma, no history of abuse. but she lived with a constant, inexplicable fear that people she loved would leave her. Romantic relationships were particularly hard. The smallest silence would spark panic. She eventually sought help, and after a series of neurological evaluations and therapeutic sessions, a pattern emerged. Maya had spent months in the hospital as an infant, premature, hooked to machines, separated from her mother. She had no memory of it, no stories, no photographs, and yet the fear she felt in her adult life mapped perfectly onto that early separation. "I didn't know what happened," she said, "but my body never forgot. Science now affirms what so many intuitively feel, that early experiences, even those we can't name, shape us at the deepest levels. And if that's true, we must ask, how much of who we are is rooted in moments we'll never consciously remember? And what happens when those hidden memories begin to steer the course of our adult lives?" As science peers deeper into the mind, an unsettling truth continues to emerge. The you that formed before you had words, the pre-verbal self shaped by sensation, rhythm, and raw emotion, may still be guiding your reactions today, not from memory in the traditional sense, but from reflex, from patterns buried in the architecture of your brain. This realization raises profound conflicts, not just emotional or therapeutic, but ethical and scientific as well. If our earliest emotional impressions were formed without language or logic, how can we understand them, let alone heal them? And what if, in trying to make sense of them, we inadvertently rewrite history, not with accuracy, but with story? The science helps us begin to untangle this. The limbic system, the brain's emotional core, including structures like the amygdala and hippocampus, matures earlier than the prefrontal cortex, the seat of logic, planning, and self-regulation. This means we are wired to asterisk, feel asterisk long before we can asterisk, think asterisk. In infancy, emotions like fear, joy, or sadness flood the system, but there is no filter yet, no way to make sense of them, no language to narrate what's happening. Instead, infants rely on caregivers to reflect and regulate those states. The calm voice that soothes, the arms that hold, the eyes that mirror emotion back with understanding. When that mirroring is missing, inconsistent, or frightening, the brain adapts. It wires itself not for safety, but for survival, preparing for abandonment, chaos, or disconnection. The result? An adult who may look composed on the surface, but inside still feels as unsteady and unseen as the child they once were. This leads to one of the deepest questions in therapeutic science. Can childhood memory be rewritten? And if it can, asterisk should asterisk it be? Therapeutic modalities like EMDR, somatic experiencing, and inner child work all attempt to access these early emotional imprints, not to recover factual memories, but to release the unresolved energy stored within them. But memory is not a fixed archive. It's a dynamic, reconstructive process. This makes healing both powerful and precarious. The mind, in its desire for meaning, may generate memories to explain what the body feels, even if those memories aren't historically accurate. The 1990s witnessed the dangerous edge of this, when the recovered memory movement led to false accusations, broken families, and legal catastrophes. In some cases, individuals remembered traumatic events that had never happened, vivid, emotionally real recollections that turned out to be false. Elizabeth Loftus's groundbreaking work on memory malleability showed just how easily false memories can be implanted, especially when a person is vulnerable and guided by authority figures. But her work also uncovered something more nuanced, that emotions can be true, even when the details are not. The body may carry fear, shame, or grief from events it cannot narrate. In trying to name those feelings, the mind may create stories that feel real because the emotion is real. This blurs the boundary between history and experience, raising difficult questions. If a false memory brings genuine healing, is it still harmful? If a real trauma is misremembered, is the healing any less valid? These questions ripple into modern therapy and relationships. Attachment theory, once a niche concept, is now a central pillar of psychological understanding. Therapists and couples alike recognize that many adult conflicts are not truly about the present moment, but about the past reenacting itself in disguise. Arguments about trust, space, or intimacy often trace back to unconscious expectations formed in childhood, the fear that love will be withdrawn, that needs will be unmet, that closeness always precedes abandonment. The conflict isn't just interpersonal, it's intrapersonal. It's a conversation between the adult you and the child still echoing inside. So we arrive at a modern truth that is both empowering and unsettling. The question isn't only what happened to you, it's what your brain learned to expect from people, from love, from the world itself. And if that learning happened before you had words, how can you possibly explain it now? To heal, we may not need to remember every detail, but we do need to listen, not just with logic, but with compassion, to the parts of us that still speak in feelings. The twist isn't that childhood shapes who you are, it's that it never stops. You don't outgrow it, you grow around it. The adult brain doesn't replace the child brain, it's built on top of it, layer by layer, like a house constructed on an old foundation. And if that foundation is cracked or unstable, if it was built in fear, neglect, or loneliness, the entire structure above it feels subtly off. That's the neurological truth now emerging from decades of brain research. Early neural patterns, formed before memory and language, become the default operating systems of the adult mind. They guide emotion, expectation, reaction, all beneath the surface. Even if you don't consciously remember what happened in your first months or years, your nervous system does. It carries a kind of body map, a felt history of comfort or chaos, connection or confusion. This map isn't metaphor, it's biology. The autonomic nervous system encodes early experience, not in images, but in patterns. The way your breath shortens when someone raises their voice, the tightness in your chest during silence, the reflex to withdraw when someone gets too close. These are not irrational fears. They're ancient strategies built for survival in a world you couldn't yet explain. And because they were encoded so early, they persist. Not because you're broken, but because your brain did exactly what it was designed to do, adapt. The emotional breakthrough often comes years later, in therapy, or crisis, or deep introspection, when people seek answers not in their memories, but in their patterns. Why do I always feel this way? Why can't I trust? Why does love feel unsafe, even when nothing is wrong? The search often leads back to childhood, not for blame, but for understanding. And often, people seek closure, not to rewrite history, but to stabilize their present. A conversation with a parent, a letter never sent, a moment of clarity. These are not acts of regression. They are acts of reintegration, pulling the past back into view, not to relive it, but to reweave it into the self with compassion and perspective. And here, the philosophical shift reveals itself. Maybe healing isn't about forgetting at all. Maybe it's about remembering differently, from the safety of now, from the calmness that wasn't available then, to revisit a wound, not to reopen it, but to hold it in a way that finally makes sense, to meet the child you once were, not with judgment, but with gentleness. That's not weakness, that's wholeness. And it's how the past stops echoing in every present moment, not by silencing it, but by listening, and finally understanding. What we know now is both scientifically grounded and deeply human. The brain doesn't store memory in one neat place. It stores it across multiple systems. Explicit memory lets us recall facts and events. Procedural memory teaches us how to ride a bike or drive a car. Emotional memory holds on to what we felt. And implicit memory, perhaps the most elusive, carries experiences we cannot name, yet they shape us all the same. Early memories, especially those formed before language, don't disappear. They sink beneath words, surfacing in heartbeat, breath, muscle tension, a raised voice that tightens your chest. a smell that makes you inexplicably sad. These aren't random. They're echoes of emotional moments long ago, encoded not in narrative, but in sensation. Trauma remembers itself in vigilance, startle responses, the way the body prepares to protect itself, even when there's no visible threat. But joy remembers, too, in laughter, in moments of calm, in the ease we feel around people who feel like home. These early imprints shape how we move through the world. And for decades, therapy focused mostly on cognitive understanding. Now, we know better. Advances in therapeutic practice, like EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, somatic experiencing, and inner child work, acknowledge that true healing doesn't always happen through story alone. It happens in the body, in repatterning the way we hold tension, in re-experiencing moments of safety, in teaching the nervous system that the danger has passed. One of the most hopeful insights from neuroscience is memory reconsolidation, the brain's ability to update old memories with new emotional context. When a painful experience is recalled in a safe environment and paired with a new feeling, calm, understanding, support, the brain can quite literally revise how that memory feels, not erase it, but soften it. And because the brain is plastic, capable of change throughout life, this means childhood isn't destiny. It's just the beginning, not a life sentence, but a starting point, a foundation that can be reinforced, renovated, even rebuilt. This has deep relevance to everyday life. The moment you overreact to a partner's silence, the fear that strikes during conflict, the urge to withdraw or chase or collapse in relationships. These aren't signs of brokenness. They're signs of younger parts of you still active, still trying to protect you the only way they once knew how. Understanding this reframes everything. Instead of shame, there is curiosity. Instead of judgment, compassion. Because the truth is, you're not broken. You're responding to an old script. And the most beautiful part of being human is this. You can rewrite it with patience, with help, and with love. A woman sits in the dim glow of a nightlight, cradling her newborn son. He squirms, fusses, caught between sleep and wakefulness. She rocks him gently, her body swaying in rhythm older than thought. Without knowing why, she begins to hum, a soft lullaby, fragile and slow. She doesn't remember learning it. No one taught her. But somewhere, deep within, the melody had waited. Her mother sang it once, maybe only once. The baby quiets. His breathing slows. In that small, quiet moment, something ancient stirs. Something old is passed on. Not just a song, but a feeling. A thread that runs through generations, linking breath to breath, cradle to cradle. And without a word, something long buried begins to heal. Because childhood never truly leaves us. It weaves itself into our breath, our instincts, our choices. It becomes the soil from which everything else grows. Love, fear, resilience, tenderness. Not all memories rise to the surface. Some remain hidden, layered beneath language and logic. But they shape the tide of our lives, the pull of relationships, the patterns we return to, the way we respond to joy or loss or silence. They shape who we believe ourselves to be, and more importantly, who we believe we're allowed to become. So maybe the point isn't to forget the past, or even to fix it. Maybe the real work begins with turning back, not in regret, but in recognition. What map did your childhood draw? What emotions did it etch into your body? And what stories did it whisper about who you are and what you're worth? If you paused long enough to listen, you might hear more than pain. You might hear the voice of a child who never stopped waiting to be seen. Not for answers, not for perfection, just to be remembered. And in remembering, maybe you'll discover that healing isn't about erasing the echo. It's about learning to sing with it,